Welcome to Wonderful Words beginning with M. And today I'm going to be welcoming some very distinguished individuals who are going to help me to teach this tutorial. My own students are used to having them in our lessons, but perhaps they may be new to you. However, if you've been looking at my Facebook posts this week, then they may not be so new to you. Let me show you what I mean. So we have had that master of characterisation himself, Mr. Charles Dickens, helping me to teach Year 5, 11 plus creative writing and comprehension. And for symbolism, of course, Mr. William Golding. So teaching comprehension and creative writing through the works of great writers, that's what real English teachers, so secondary school English teachers, do every day. And it's worth saying that the people that write the creative writing exams and mark the creative writing exams are real English teachers like me. So really, in order to be taught 11 plus comprehension and creative writing well, that is the way that you should be taught. That is the way that 11 plus comprehension and creative writing should be taught in order for it to be taught well. And continuing on that rather illustrious path, students, in today's tutorial, we're going to be joined by Mr. John Keats, Ms. Jane Austen, and Mr. William Shakespeare. And you never know, Mr. Charles Dickens may just make an appearance, so watch out for him. I get to spend time with the people I love and adore. They're all here. And your children get a first-rate education. Win-win. So let's get back on track with the tutorial. Today, I'm going to be ramping up the melancholy and becoming maudlin, mawkish even. But don't worry, students, it's not mandatory to be morose. Wonderful words beginning with M. Are you ready? Let's go. Now here is a word I know that you know. Whenever students come to me, they always cite this one as an example of ambitious vocabulary. Melancholy or melancholic. Oh, wait a moment, that's not quite right, is it? That's better. Extreme sadness. Extremely sad. Extremely sad. Now, I know that you know these words already, and you should certainly know them because they're included in the free lessons. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with knowing these words. However, you do need to remember that creative writing examiners, whether they are marking GCSE work or 11 plus work, we're sticklers for a range of ambitious vocabulary used effectively to quote the creative writing mark scheme. Therefore, you do need to know a range of different synonyms for melancholy and melancholic. Let me introduce you to a couple of them. But first, let's just look at melancholy and melancholic. Now, hitherto, I would have distinguished between the usage of melancholy as an adjective and melancholic as an adjective. However, after doing some internet research, as is my wont, I can say that they are more or less used in the same way these days. Just to clarify and to bring in some grammar, of course, let's look at some example sentences. So here are 4 particularly marvellous sentences. He was insolent, haughty, melancholic, and dull. He had many melancholy reflections of his school days. Melancholy descended over her with the rain. My goodness, some pathetic fallacy there, students. The books had fallen on the floor. I entered to survey the melancholic scene. Quick grammar test. Abstract noun or adjective in sentence 1. In sentence 2, is melancholy an abstract noun or an adjective? How about in sentence 3 and 4? Did you get them right? And don't forget, students, grammar is integral to being an excellent English student. As I've said before, sometimes I'm a bit bewildered when people ask me, do you teach grammar or do you just teach creative writing? And my response, can you teach maths without teaching numbers? Because you cannot teach creative writing without teaching grammar. And you can't teach comprehension without teaching grammar. The creative writing mark scheme cites effective use of grammatical techniques. And grammar comes up in the CAL section of comprehension questions for the 11 plus. To be taught 11 plus or any English well, grammar needs to be taught. Said that melancholic and melancholy are these days interchangeable when they are used as adjectives. Let's put that to the test, shall we? There we are, I've changed them. So, he was insolent, haughty, melancholy and dull. That's perfectly fine. He had many melancholic reflections of his school days. And likewise, the books had fallen on the floor. I entered to survey the melancholy scene. That last sentence does remind me of something. Hold on, students, I feel a tangent coming on. So, at Sutton Grammar, room 8 was my classroom. And in room 8, there were many books, as you would expect. And a lot of them were my own books. So books that I'd had since I was a child, books that I'd had since I was at university, because of course I studied English at university, books that I'd collected throughout my life, and also a lot of books that my parents had given me, and their books also. For our reading lessons, I had book boxes, and many of them contained my children's books as well. My children are both avid, voracious readers, and they are also stellar English students, as you may know. In order to understand my attitude to books, I need to tell you a little bit about the way that I was brought up. So in our household, when I was growing up, books were revered. They were treated with respect. They were symbols of our education. And as immigrants coming here, our education was a passport to a better life. So therefore, books have always been very important to me and to my family. They still are, as you can see. There they all are. And so they certainly were in my classroom at Sutton Grammar. To be tied any child who knocked a book onto the floor or didn't give a book its due respect. So after our reading lessons, I would expect my books to be returned lovingly onto my bookshelves and lovingly placed into my book boxes. And the boys did learn to respect this. However, one day it all went drastically wrong. I had been away on jury service for 3 weeks, a long time, but I had no choice but to turn up and do my jury service. And one of the things that I noticed upon my return was the state of my classroom, but also the state of my books. They had not been lovingly placed into the book boxes. They had not been respectfully returned to the shelves. In fact, there was a real shambolic air. A shambolic air I'd like to think that had been caused by enthusiasm and carelessness rather than by deliberate perniciousness. Year 9 form, obviously we're in there, and I was taking the register, And at one point I looked down and something caught my eye. What was it, students? It was this book. This book here, and it had fallen onto the floor and was squashed in between my table and my computer station. Absolutely squashed, and the cover was ripped and had fallen off and was elsewhere in the classroom. And this lovely book of quotations was given to me by my dad. So it says in here, Maya, happy Easter, 6th of April 2004. That's so typical of my dad. He was very methodical, so he stamped it. With love from Mummy and Daddy. And so this book obviously meant a lot to me, as do all of my beautiful books. And I was bereft when I saw it there. I stopped, and certainly, students, a fit of melancholy descended over me. And as I picked it up, and I was visibly upset, to give them their due, a fit of melancholy also descended over the form. And you could tell that the boys were contrite by the way they left the classroom. I was on a break duty, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye some of my boys, some of my Year 9 form, going into the art block, 7 or 8 of them. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought they'd gone in to do some artwork. But as I was leaving, after the bell went, as I was leaving the playground, I noticed again out of the corner of my eye a little deputation of boys coming towards me, and I recognised them as members of my form. And they were holding this book, and they were kind of holding it out like this. And then one of them came up to me and gave it to me and said, Mrs Glasson, we're really sorry. We tried to fix it for you. And it was such a lovely gesture, and I understand they didn't do it on purpose. I thought that that was really kind and thoughtful. And boys, if you're watching, it's still here, and it's still very much revered. And all the more revered, I suppose, for that memory, and also by my hope that I have, by being a bit of a stickler about these things, managed to impart to you this idea that books are to be revered and loved because they hold the keys to a world of knowledge and to your education, which will always be your passport to a better life.
Thank you
to my mum and dad for teaching me that. And here we have one of my guests. I mentioned melancholy. I've been talking about melancholy, and I know English teachers, if you're watching, you can't think about that word without thinking about this beautiful poem by John Keats. Let's see. There's his biography. There's his collection of letters. I think let's look to the Norton, actually. So in my Norton, yes, Ode on Melancholy. Students, parents, teachers, everyone, if you haven't read Keats's Ode on Melancholy, read it. It's a beautiful poem. Let's get back to the tutorial, for I had been having so much fun that I'd quite forgotten about it. So I said that I was going to ramp up the melancholy and teach you some more words that are related to it. Here is a word, maudlin. Again, all of my students know this word, and indeed all of these words, because I do teach a lot of words. And if you're interested in being taught more words by me, then in the 11 Plus Foundation course, I teach over 200. And in the 11 Plus Revision course, I teach over 300, as well as comprehension, creative writing, grammar. And as some of you will know, that the main reason for failing the 11 Plus is poor vocabulary. So here we have maudlin, but again, it's not just sad, excessively sad and sentimental, self-pitying even. You know, when somebody is kind of wallowing in their own sadness. Literary Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. There is a character in it who is very memorably Maudlin. The way that she got herself into a state, Mrs Bennet this is, over the antics of her daughters and their quest for husbands. So she was Maudlin, excessively sad and superficial even. So there's this feeling that the sadness, the excessive sadness when you describe somebody as Maudlin is a bit superficial and a bit fake even. Haven't read Pride and Prejudice, read it. There are so many websites that will support your reading of it. BBC Bitesize, Spark Notes. That's all you need. You just need the copy of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen on one of those wonderful websites that will help to support your reading. And of course, there are so many wonderful novels by Jane Austen. Lady Margaret, I think I had to read all of her novels by the time I was 14. So I'm very well versed in the works of Jane Austen. And with that self-consciously superficial way of expressing melancholy, mawkish. Now there's a fantastic word. And that does mean in an over-exaggerated, superficial, false way. Mawkish, sad and sentimental in an over-exaggerated, superficial, false way. So we have Mrs Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. We also have Count Orsino from Twelfth Night, that wonderful Shakespeare play that I taught my son for A-level English literature. And, of course, Romeo from Romeo and Juliet. Let's look at some example sentences featuring those protagonists and those works of literature. In Pride and Prejudice, Mrs Bennet's excessively melancholic behaviour is mawkish and deplorable. What do you mean you don't know what deplorable means? Look it up. Shakespeare's portrayal of Count Orsino, if music be the food of love, leaves the protagonist open to charges of mawkish self-pity. And Romeo's immature attention-seeking may be endearing to some and mawkish to others. Oh, what was he like? Stealing into the covert of the wood, wanting to be seen, sighing, shutting himself away in his room in darkness. I'm afraid I've encountered enough attention-seeking teenagers in my time to find that kind of behaviour mawkish. One might go so far as to say that that kind of behaviour would make me morose. And again, my students, I know you know what that means, but let's just have a look at some synonyms, many of which, again, you will know. Here are some fantastic ones. Irascible and cantankerous, again from the free lessons. Sullen and sulky, and of course, just as in the free lessons, the literary reference. Of course, Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Featured in the free lessons and a novella that everybody should read. And finally, students, a word beginning with M that you would have encountered in your lives. When you go to school, do you wear a school uniform? Do you have to wear a school uniform? At the school I went to, Lady Margaret, I had to wear a school uniform. I had no option. So every day I would go to school all the way from Sutton to Fulham on the bus wearing a black blazer with red stripes. I returned to the school as a teacher later on in my life, and that was a wonderful experience. But I did remember what it was like to be so visible and different on the bus, certainly. So, in summary, if you have to wear a school uniform to school, if it's not optional. Then your school uniform, like my school uniform at Lady Margaret, is mandatory or compulsory. Synonym there, obligatory. Another example from our lives. Unfortunately, until recently, because of COVID, the wearing of face masks in public, that was also mandatory or obligatory. One had no choice. Optional, to use the antonym. So mandatory and obligatory, meaning compulsory, and optional, meaning the opposite. So then you do have a choice. So have you pressed the pink subscribe button yet? I hope so. Okay, so now it's just left for me to thank my illustrious guests. And I'd forgotten I had these actually. So, Miss Jane Austen, Mr. William Shakespeare, the lovely Mr. John Keats, and of course, Mr. Charles Dickens. There they all are, sitting here with me. For it is they and their many colleagues over here that I have to thank for making me the English student and the English teacher that I am. It is they who have helped me to elevate my lexis, make my diction more dexterous, and to make my English exemplary. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next time with wonderful words beginning with N.